welcome everyone. This is our second session of 2019, so we're excited to be back after the holiday season. So happy New Year to everyone as well on the call. We want to just get a quick sense from everyone if you have attended the Walter Mackenzie Leadership Forum last Thursday, where we presented Chapter 2. So if you could quickly just vote, hopefully it's up on your Skype screen there. We want to get a sense of who attended, and so we're not too repetitive here today, but we do want to highlight some key concepts that we presented, of course, on Thursday, and we'll continue with that here today with some key aspects around user groups near the end of the session.
And just to let everybody know, we will be recording today's session so that we can post it on Insight later this week. So the session will be recorded.
Wonderful. All right. So similar to yesterday, we had about 80% attended, I believe, yesterday on yesterday's call. So it's great. Okay, so I'm just going to present our slide deck here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Perfect. So before we get started, we just want to get a sense of if there's any kind of burning issues or comments or questions from anyone in the group, just to make sure that we can kind of focus on some key pieces that maybe that you're looking for, that questions around. So I'll just open it up to the floor for just a couple minutes to see if there's any comments or questions from people that we want to ensure that we highlight here today in today's session.
Hello, Eric. It's Norma from HIM.
Hey, Norma.
Just wondering if you're going to cover anything regarding the user groups.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be coming in near the end of the session here today. We'll have Deb Van Haften, the Executive Director for Connect Care Clinical Operations in the Edmonton Zone. She'll be on later today to discuss some of those pieces. So if there's any questions when she's on, please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Anyone else? So if there's anything different than what we planned on doing today, which is, of course, the Chapter 2 overview, a little bit of orientation on that, similar presentation to what we did last Thursday with some key aspects around user groups near the end of the session. If there's anything different that anyone wants to highlight or to be aware of, then just let us know in the chat box and we'll try to capture that through our presentation today. Okay. So for today, we just want to do a Playbook concept recap. We want to highlight some reporting pieces and the newly minted Tableau reporting structure that we do have. So we want to show you guys that. Introduce some change impacts as Chapter 2, as we know them now on the process readiness side of things. We, of course, have a variety of work packages, one of which will be next week during virtual office hours as an introduction around super user identification. So stay tuned for that if you're interested in attending next week's. And as mentioned, we'll be discussing user groups and core owner structure later in the session, and then of course discuss some next steps moving forward. So just generally the Playbook concept recap. So we know that it's an electronic resource, of course, made up of a total of 6 chapters. We have released the first one November 7th. Of course, the second one January 10th, just last week. And the third one will be in April of this year, early April of this year. It's essentially a one-stop shop for Connect Care preparations with reporting pieces, resources, work packages, as mentioned, some key tools and templates that exist throughout the document. So if you have yet to look at the Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, they're currently on Insight, and we'll walk through that later in the session where you can find these key resources as well. We started this campaign at Adoption Validation 2 and then Adoption Validation 3 in terms of focus groups. So we wanted to hear from operational leaders and what the needs were for a variety of stakeholders and leadership groups. and we want to continue this our focus groups later this year, but also want to hear from operational leaders across the spectrum via email at playbook@ahs.ca or through these forums. So we want to hear what's working well, what's not working well, and how we can adjust moving forward. We want to make sure that this is a seamless, integrated process. And so we just wanted to quickly highlight Dawn, who provided some insight from Chapter 1 after the release, about really just trying to streamline some content and making sure that the key checklists and key pieces that the operational leaders need to get done was further focused and highlighted in Chapter 1. So we've made some adjustments for Chapter 2 by highlighting the work packages, some due dates, what that means, some electronic resource or links, I should say, within the document that highlights key pieces of information and pertinent pieces. As well as the priority reading. So we now have kind of two concepts within the people, process, technology, and project side of things in terms of priority reading versus reading for your understanding. So it's a little bit, it's a way to prioritize your time and some key pieces that we want to highlight moving forward. So if there's any other feedback, we'd love to hear from you guys as necessary. So the concept of the playbook, we really have these 4 buckets of introductory content and materials around people, process, technology, and project. As we move forward for Chapter 3 and beyond, the process side of thing is going to be built out. We introduced this into Chapter 2, but this is going to be more granular, more focused, and more detailed as we move forward for Chapter 3 specifically and then and beyond. However, we continue with the updates around people and around technology and around project. So we'll continue those updates and that content, but we want to highlight the fact that process becomes to be a bit more comprehensive as we move forward throughout each of the chapters. So as mentioned, Chapter 1, the release at the Walter Mackenzie Center for Wave 1 was on November 7th, and focusing mostly on awareness. So what do organizational changes and benefits look like? What does reporting look like? How do we access that? So we've had some iterations on the reporting side of things, and we'll speak to that in a moment. But really, it was that kind of 10,000-foot level in terms of introducing Connect Care and what the playbook is going to look like moving forward over the next 52 weeks. And so now we've released Chapter 2, and that's around desire. So if we're thinking of the ADKAR framework around awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, and finally we have Chapter 6 on congratulations. Chapter 2 is focusing on desire, so introducing some process readiness, change impacts, introducing that super user role and identification related to the work packages, and really just getting into some more granular pieces around change impact specific around the process side. So if you can think of the Chapter 1 around that 10,000-foot level, Chapter 2 is about 5,000 feet, and then we're going to get more granular as we move forward through this process of introducing and orienting individuals around playbooks. So Chapter 3 is going to be around the knowledge framework and focused on training readiness. Chapter 4 will be engagement readiness around ability and really introducing that playground environment and readiness activities related to go live and launch. And then finally, in Chapter 5 will be a fall release in 2019 around reinforcement and how to prepare and make sure that we're ready to go live in November for Wave 1 anyway. So this is just another high-level overview of dates and timelines when you can expect releases of chapters as we move forward. So as mentioned, Chapter 3 will be early April, Chapter 4 will be sometime in June, and then September will be Chapter 5. We're waiting on some further information around Chapter 6 and what that might look like for post go live and launch. So stay tuned for that. So I'm just going to pass it over to Chelsea real quick to discuss all things Readiness Playbook reporting.
Thanks. So as you know, in Chapter 1, we had managers asked to complete readiness reporting on a few items. There was 9 different questions. 7 of those questions were about setting a baseline understanding of where our people are at in terms of their readiness and understanding about Connect Care as a project and as a concept. And 2 questions about were you able to share the information in the playbook with your teams, and did you get a chance to attend or view a recording of the orientation for the playbook? So with those 9 questions, we were really trying to establish the structure for reporting, make sure that we worked out all of the kinks before we introduced more comprehensive questions to measure readiness for, as Eric alluded to, some of the complex process readiness that will come in the months ahead. So with those readiness questions, managers had 2 options to complete the people readiness aspect. One option was to circulate a survey to your staff, either via email or by printing it and having them fill it out, and then collect that data and use it to enter the responses into the reporting tool as a total percentage of your team. Or a manager could just take a pulse check of their team and answer on behalf of the team of where they think that their staff are at. And so once that information was captured in the reporting tool, we were then able to display some results in a summary of Tableau reporting on a dashboard last week on January 10th. And so that Tableau dashboard will be what we continue to use to show results of the reporting that we're doing and to gauge overall readiness for the zone, for the sites, and for different teams. And so with that reporting, we were using the facility ID structure, which a lot of managers may have been involved in some of that validation work, or your direct, the person that you report to may have been involved in that validation process, to make sure that we're using the names that future state departments will be called. And so this slide here just shows you a snapshot from those Tableau dashboards. It's really a nice clean summary of the results of the reporting using some color coding to show progress. But this is available for anybody to use and to take a peek at, so you can always go back and check how other folks are doing. And there's a live demonstration with a link to the Tableau here was what we did at January 10th, where we had Doc Lovely come up and demonstrate the process to use the reporting tool. But we'll also get into that at the end of the presentation today.
Chelsea,
Yeah.
It's Nicole at the U. I just have a quick question around the reporting piece and just wanted to clarify because I've heard a couple of different ways that people are reporting differently. And one is just so if a unit manager is reporting on their direct reports, that they are including themselves in that reporting in the readiness. And then like if a PCM level has just the UMs and the front line that report to them, then the PCMs necessarily wouldn't be reporting on any other area. But then other people had said that the PCMs should be doing a readiness survey on their UMs.
Yeah, so
That makes
Nicole,
sense.
we want to make sure that each team is reported independently. So I know that there's a few PCMs that would have a smaller set of direct reports, some clinical staff like cardiac navigators or whoever at the
Right.
U. So they would report in through those specific teams. But ideally, we would have the UMs reporting on themselves through each of the teams that they're responsible for.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. So with Chapter 2 reporting now looking ahead, we haven't released any of the Chapter 2 reporting items yet. We're still just working to make sure that we've got Chapter 1 reporting wrapped up. Everybody's had a chance to complete that, and we have an accurate representation of all of the teams that we need to capture for reporting going forward. But with Chapter 2 reporting, you can expect that we will be continuing to track people readiness trends. So we'll have those same 7 people readiness questions, and we'll be able to see the growth over time as we progress closer to launch. We'll also be measuring completion of the work packages that we've been asking operational leaders to do to date. So checking in to make sure that all of the work packages that were assigned have been completed if they are past due. And then finally, we'll also start to look at some of the reporting on completion with the Chapter 3 release. So looking to line up the reporting with the next upcoming chapters and some of the change impacts as well. So speaking of change impacts, we know that process readiness is where we look to clearly articulate what future state workflows and processes will be and provide the tools to address some of those changes. So right now, the project team, a lot of the operational involvement from stakeholders who have supported area councils at the provincial level have been doing work to define what future state will look like for AHS. And so our job now is to bring that through the playbook to operational leaders and have you take a look at some of these future state changes that are coming. So we'll be looking to introduce some of the practice and workflow change impacts that are going to occur before staff go to training, so that staff have a good idea of these concepts and have heard of them before. And then so when they go into the training classroom and learn the functionality, they're prepped and ready to learn that fingers to keyboards type of learning. So it really is critical that we do a good job of talking about the concepts of these change impacts before we get in front of the system to make sure that the workflow changes are well understood by staff. And so chapter 3, as Eric mentioned, we're going to build on this change impact information and have it at that granular level by program or specialty area. And so the reason we need to do this is threefold. Number one, some of the system configuration and specialty design is still underway. We do have the foundational system that's been built, and that was finished at the end of last year, but we do have more specialty design ongoing, so we don't have all of those change impacts up front. Second of all, we need to make sure that we pace this work to give leaders the opportunity and that time to digest and share the information in segments. And finally, we know that staff haven't had the opportunity to see the system yet. We did have a lot of great engagement with SMEs at our adoption sessions and direction setting sessions, but for the most part, our frontline staff have not seen the system. So we want to start slow. And by progressing through the details in each chapter, we can help teams to get the most out of that classroom experience where they have the system in front of them, because they will have already heard of some of the terminology. They will have already had an understanding about some of the workflow changes that are coming. And then we'll also reinforce this after training with more activities and exercises before launch. And so this is a snapshot of a graphic that we have that's part of chapter 2, and it shows a generalized healthcare journey. So a lot of these steps could be applicable to inpatient or to outpatient healthcare, but they show how Connect Care will have changes through each of these different steps through the journey. And so we're hoping that this is sort of a prelude to all of those change impacts that will come in chapter 3, and also that you can use this to start to create that desire that we're looking for. So Eric mentioned the ADCAR model. With chapter 2, we're really all about getting some excitement, getting that buy-in, showing what's in it for me, for staff to be making this big transition and putting in all this effort to learn how to use a new way of working and new tools. And so just want to highlight as well with chapter 2 that this document accompanies that graphic and shows item by item some of the benefits of the changes that are going to be made. So we've used the 4 AHS foundational strategies or pillars to spell out why we're making these changes and what they mean for our organization. So patient first, our people, information technology, as well as research and innovation. So each change that's been highlighted here is mapped across those 4 different pillars. So we'll talk a little bit now about some of the upcoming work packages. So there's 4 that have been assigned as part of chapter 2. The first one is super user identification, and that was released last week on January 10th. So there's a lot of information that you can find in the Playbook chapter about what makes a good super user and who you should be thinking of in terms of candidates for this potential opportunity. And next week at office hours, we'll have the information and the step-by-step process of what to do once you've started to identify who those super users might be. So that's our topic for virtual office hours next week. We've also got chapter 2 reporting, as mentioned, so that's not released yet, but come February we'll have those new readiness items for you to take a look at and to log your progress on with the reporting tool. We've also got part 2 of the training role analysis survey that you completed as part of chapter 1. So where you mapped the roles of your team to the Connect Care roles, you'll now have the opportunity to match individuals to the different roles in order to speed up the process for training registration later this spring. We've also got another work package that will come out in March called Standardized Medication Administration Times, which will provide information for those care areas that do administer meds on this change that's coming and next steps that you can take in advance of launch. So as mentioned, that super user identification work package, the information is all available today. And next week at office hours, we'll have those step-by-step instructions. And so the work package is due to be complete start of February 8th. And so we will have a lot more information on that topic next week. in terms of other upcoming virtual office hours and our schedule moving forward, we're talking about Chapter 2 today, and Deb Van Haffen will speak about user groups and those next steps. Next week will be super users. The week following that, we'll have eHealth Confidence Part 2, where some of the folks from the eHealth Competence team will be on the line to talk about the modules that they have available for staff who have identified as looking for extra support or looking for ways to practice their eHealth competence skills. And then the week of February 4th, we will have a virtual office hours session dedicated to supporting leaders who are completing that training role analysis Part 2 work package. So step-by-step instructions of what you need to do to get that work package done. So now we're at the point in time where we're going to turn it over to speak to Deb to speak about user groups and core owners. I just want to do a double check if Deb is on the line. She might not be quite yet. So before we start talking about user groups, was there any questions about any of the topics that we've covered so far, or anything that we can help to clarify before we move on?
Hi, Chelsea. It's Raina at Glenrose. I put a question in the chat box, but I'll just ask it now. Just thinking about managers and their capacity to support their staff once training begins. Will managers be trained earlier in the training process? Do you know that yet?
I can see we do have a couple of members of the training team on the line, so not to put on the spot if we don't have an answer for that question yet, but just wondering if, Allison, if you would know the answer to that one.
Hi, Rani, and I'm happy to be put on the spot. I am not aware of any specific scheduling considerations for managers, but as far as I know, the schedule will be open, so maybe it's something we can encourage managers to do, is to schedule their own training much earlier in the process, and as early as possible, so that they can answer questions and so on.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate that. And we'll take that as a follow-up when we get more information to make sure we bring it back to the virtual office hour sessions.
Any other questions before we move on?
It's Norma from HIM again. Just a quick confirmation for the readiness reporting. Will that be for each chapter up into chapter 6 that we do readiness reporting, do you know, or is it like chapter 5 and then that would be it for readiness reporting?
Yeah, so we haven't quite defined what chapter 6 will look like yet. We do know that we need to have that opportunity to address optimization, sustainability, thriving, and supporting future waves as well with lessons learned. So we anticipate for sure that there'll be readiness reporting all the way up to chapter 5. However, not sure yet what that might look like for chapter 6.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to give Deb a couple more minutes here. I think she's just wrapping up another meeting. So what we'll do is I will show a few demonstrations of just accessing some of these materials that we've talked about through Insight and Tableau. So just give us a second here while we switch screens. So I'm on the readiness reporting tool right now. The URL for this is carereporting.albertahealthservices.ca/playbook. And so this is the tool that we're using to capture all of our reporting data. So the way to use this is by selecting your zone, your city, your site, and your department through the drop-downs. And where you see that maybe your department is not listed, using this button here to let us know. So as I sort of alluded to, we've used the facility ID structure, which has a specific nomenclature that gives now AHS a provincial standard for how we name departments. And so the departments might look a little bit different than what you're used to, but that's what we use for facility ID for identifying all of our patient care areas. Where facility ID doesn't exactly represent the level of granularity that we're looking to get to capture readiness reporting is in some cases where it's indirect patient care that's happening. So examples of that would be spaces like lab at the University of Alberta Hospital, for example, because that's built at one level, whereas we know there's multiple different teams within the labs. And so that's another reason where you might say, I think I need to say my department or site was not listed, because it's just not the level of granularity that represents a team with a manager. So you can see where departments have an asterisk beside them in this list, it means that they were added in through that process of sending the email to say my department wasn't listed. And it means that they're not a reflection of the facility ID structure. So as mentioned, there was 9 readiness questions for Chapter 1. 2 of them were about attending orientation for Chapter 1 and sharing information with your teams, and 7 of them were about people readiness. So we're asking that if you haven't done this yet, you do take the opportunity to complete this survey so that we can have complete record for Chapter 1 and a baseline of understanding of where our teams are at about 10 months out from launch. And so after you've completed using the drop downs, you just click the Save and Submit button, and that will automatically refresh our Tableau dashboards with that new information every morning at 8 a.m. And if you do run into any technical issues, you can always use this button here as well, and just let us know via email. It'll auto-populate an email for you to send directly to us. One thing that we are looking to add that will be available for Chapter 2 reporting is that ability and that functionality within the reporting tool to select multiple departments at once. So that's something that we have under development and will be ready for Chapter 2 for managers who have multiple teams that are going through all of the same readiness activities because they all have the same manager. So that's something that we're excited about for Chapter 2. But I'll just stop now and bounce over to the Tableau dashboard if there's no questions about this reporting tool. Okay, seeing none in the chat box, I'm just going to keep going. So this is the Tableau dashboard that we were talking about. And so this is a really great way to show a summary of all the results from that reporting tool. So across the top here, you can do any of these filters to get specific information if you want to look at a more granular level than just the whole entire wave. So what this shows you is the total of teams that have reported so far and the total teams that we anticipate to complete reporting for Chapter 1. So we're still not quite at halfway yet. And so this is a great way to identify who we need to catch up with some of the reporting. So down this scroll bar shows you yes or no for whether the reporting results were submitted. So this is how you can identify if the reporting has been completed or not. And then down at the bottom shows you the types of responses that were received. So what's great to see here is the dark blue representing the highest proportion of answers to that question. So the question for my team has had the opportunity to participate and my team is comfortable implementing Connect Care based on the information shared. We're really glad to see that this is still very low because we know that this is going to grow over time as staff have that opportunity to go to training and have that opportunity to be engaged in some of the readiness events that come to sites. So this is as you'd expect with really the dark blue over to the left column. And anticipating with each chapter when we ask this question with subsequent reporting phases that the dark blue shifts over. What's great to see though is that the question of my team is committed to taking part in the change and my team understands why Connect Care is being implemented. Those two questions have high responses for the 76 to 100% of team. So that says to us that our leaders are doing a great job of sharing information with the teams about why Connect Care is coming. And it's a great place to be in that this is where we see that dark blue. So any questions about the Tableau dashboard?
Hi, yes, I have a question. This is Colleen from Covenant Health, and I just put it in the chat box too. So what should okay, so Eric just answered it for me. So if managers are having issues with completing, or they have completed their reporting, but it's not showing up as Tableau, they're just to send an email to Playbook at ahs.ca.
Yeah,
we'll follow up, Colleen. There's a couple of them. people that have actually emailed us and said that they haven't seen it. It's been a couple days. It wasn't 24, 48 hours. It was more like 4 or 5 days. So we do want to hear about those. It could be a glitch on our system. We know that this is new and this was just developed. So we want to hear about those concerns in a timely manner so we can follow up appropriately.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that forward. That's great. And so Deb Van Haften is on the line now. So if people are feeling comfortable with the information about reporting, then we will hand it over to Deb. I think the last thing to showcase is the Insight page where you can find all this information. So when you go to Insight, you can either search for Connect Care or use the Teams to go down to Connect Care here. And all of this information, all of the links, all of the playbook lives here on the Readiness tab. So Chapter 2 that we've been talking about today, the link can be found right here. And all the information about work packages as well lives on this right-hand side in the columns. I'm going to stop my presenting now, and we will just have Deb walk us through user groups.
So Deb, I'll just present the PowerPoint real quick for you. It's all yours. Sorry, Deb, are you online there? Might be on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. I said, yeah, we are in a state of flux.
Perfect. So, Deb, you can see the screen, I hope?
I sure can.
Wonderful.
Okay, so when we're talking about user groups, this is a, I guess, a new type of group that we're striking. But truly, we do believe, there have been user groups in the past for other initiatives like eClinician or for, are you there, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, my screens have all gone black, so I'm just not sure what's happened here, but we've got the audio, so I can't see anything, and I don't know why it's not coming back. But anyway, so with the user groups, people who've done eCritical and some other programs, when you get your people together about, how are we going to do this? So the purpose of the user group is the user groups will have decisions to make, but those decisions are based on not re-examining what was decided in area councils or specialty groups. It's deciding to say how big an impact are some of these changes, and these will be identified by some of our core leads and other people, saying how big a change is this? What do we have to do to get our people prepared and understanding the change? And that part of it is so that they understand those basics prior to going into the actual classroom training. So when you look at it, all the work to date at direction setting, area councils, specialty design groups have been what needs to go into the system, what kind of workflow needs to be in there, and really, and the purpose of the user group is the how, and that's why it's important. Now we have organized the user groups by area so far, and I think one of the issues that we are that we're now faced with is we're having a bit of a pause and a bit of a revisit on the structure, and particularly with the Walter Mackenzie site going first, they want to have another look at this. We had an in-depth discussion yesterday, so there may be some refinements. We're still going to have user groups. They might look a little bit different. We may need to adjust what we think is what's required for co-chairs and and those sorts of things. But at any rate, we will what we'll do then is we will keep you up to date. So truthfully, the matter right now is that we are a bit behind in terms of getting them established, getting all of this finalized, getting the meeting structures out there. We have a lot of draft materials, but we won't be releasing those until we settle some of these outstanding questions. And I think a big question is, who should the members be on a user group? It can be a variety of members. But I know certainly some areas are leaning towards their patient care managers, their perhaps their educators, or some frontline staff. And we don't want to be really prescriptive because different zones have different resources to work with. And if you say you need this type of position, they may not be available. I think the other thing that's important in a user group too is that while in wave one we're going live in acute care with one site, there are a lot of downstream impacts due to interim state. And so it's important that we have some members on our user group from the other sites in the zone, as appropriate. And we've sent that out. Now, the weighting in the user group is likely going to be weighted more heavily to the Walter Mackenzie and on the inpatient side due to the number of subspecialties. And in addition, they're the first, go live. The toughest thing that we're facing right now is the fact that the build is not complete. So we can't show you, the whole package and this is what it looks like. If we could, it's a lot easier to step backwards, step back and say, here's where we go. So right now we're really setting this up, and we're going to be pulling out discrete parts of these workflows. And so we have some challenges in there, with that. And so that's essentially, a little bit of the overview. And we're trying to keep some consistency provincially as well. And as we've said, these workflows and content have been decided provincially. It really isn't, that we're looking at various sites or programs lightly customizing that because they say, well, that's not how we do a falls assessment. This is, what we've got here. The idea is there's a new falls assessment based on, maybe whatever form. And these are the elements that are in there and that people are aware, or if there's some new processes. User groups will also identify the other clinical practice changes. So supporting these user groups, we have our core leads, many of whom you might know through your travels, and they have been working on the area council specialty work groups. They're quite involved with their analysts and supporting the build and decision making. And so they will be people who will be helping us to identify those high impact changes that staff need to be aware of. Remembering too, a lot of things are covered in training, but we want to make sure if there's something that needs more depth of understanding that we can address that prior to training so that training isn't bogged down. The core owner, and we've asked to identify core owners. Now, the majority of the core owners in the Edmonton zone are coming from the Integrated Quality Management Department. That's Donna Daniak's area, and she's repurposing their work and assigning them. Some of the clinical support services and provincial programs are identifying their own core owners. So the core owners are going to be a co-chair of these user groups. Right now, one of the things we're talking about, who should the other co-chair be for the core owner? We're looking at whether it should be an executive director from the zone, Sometimes some people think it should be a physician, and some people think it should be somebody else. So we're trying to sort through that at this time. But basically, they organize the meetings and ensure that the relevant information goes to the affected departments, units, and programs. And of course, there's the user group members, and they're critically important. The user group members do need to know a lot about what happens in their work areas and probably other work areas. User groups cannot be effective if you have 60 or 70 people. We've got to keep them probably under 20. And so that means if you're representing a site, you have to have an idea of what's happening, in that site. And when we look at the Walter Mackenzie, we need to know a little more in depth about how things are working there. The people from the other sites and programs are important in the zone because as we go through this because not everyone's going live at the same time, there'll be interim states. So let's say today you fax a form, you're transferring a patient from Walter Mackenzie to the Glenrose. And you fax over information, whatever that may be. Demographic information, and there's COACT information and all of that. So once the Walter Mackenzie goes live, those paper forms won't be in use, but there might be printouts that you can still fax over. The only thing is, it may look different. It will look different. So the receiving site needs to know, okay, today I got Form A, tomorrow I get 4B, form or printout B, but essentially they're the same material and the elements. But you can see how that can throw people if they're not prepared for it. Also, too, we have eClinician going live at most of the sites in the zone as well. So user groups are going to help us with that as well, too. Okay. And Eric's just put up a sample of our starting place. So as you can see, there's a number of user groups. There's a short synopsis on the roles and some suggested membership. So if the structure stays as it is, I think one of the first things we need to do at each user group meeting is, are there any gaps? Are there some people we need who are missing, who are critical? Another thing we'll need to do is set up working groups, because there are the subspecialties, and I'll give you an example. Cancer. Cancer isn't going live until a much later wave. However, peds oncology and adult hematology are taking the Beacon module from cancer. They've got chemotherapy protocols. So this is very specific work. So we'd have a working group to say, who do we need? Who are the leads? And then they can report back that the work is done. And those will be a lot of ad hoc working groups that we see. In addition, we might also say, you know what? There's some user groups that we really need to set up. And one of the things that we also will be dealing with are what we call the complex areas. And complex areas are activities that cross over on the whole site. And the example, pardon my pharmacy background, is barcoded medication administration. Everybody's going to have to learn to do that. It's devices, it's a big change, big process. We're likely going to set up a group for that, and we'll draw members off the user groups or to represent that. We also expect that user group members might say, you know what, on that working group, you really need Sally. Sally knows everything that there is to know about peds oncology or adult hematology. So maybe they're not sitting on the working group, or on the user group, but they can contribute to the working group. So you can see that there's going to be a lot of local flavor with that. In addition, different zones may set this up a bit differently. They may not have all the specialties. And when I look at the one we have here in the Edmonton zone, we're missing women's health. We don't have that up here. They're not going live in Wave 1 other than some clinics with eClinician and at another site, but we're dealing with that through that ambulatory mechanism. Now, when we go into Wave 3, when our other sites go up, like Fort Saskatchewan, Leduc, Westview, places that deliver babies, you know what, we may need to set that up, and particularly for Wave 4. We've looked at continuing care. Again, it's kind of similar. Do we set up a user group now, or do we just ensure that they can populate their members into there? Again, because of the downstream impact and patient transfers and patient flow. So that's kind of the general gist of all of this. And in here you can see there we have a little example of what we've proposed for critical care user groups. So we're looking at all of the critical care workflows are probably fairly similar for most groups. So from a workflow point of view, sort of how the information is going and who touches what. Where they differ, of course, is the content. They may have different tools, different order sets, and those sorts of things, and we'll go down to that. I think this is one of the things that we're really trying to grapple with in this go around, is saying, okay, I'll use cardiac sciences, and saying, okay, cardiac sciences, well, they've got critical care, they've got inpatient cardiology, they've got interventional cardiology, they've got cardiac surgery, and they're connecting into transplants and all of that. So do we organize by cardiac sciences? But then they're dealing with the multiple workflows. So we're having a bit of back and forth as to ensure that the departments maintain a semblance of order while this is going on, and they know what's happening. And so, as I said, we met for about 2 hours yesterday to work through this, and we're looking at perhaps a bit of a tweaking and how to ensure that we have those connections and communication. We're not proponents of redrawing the structure because we feel we have to start somewhere. But again, it's a learning curve. There's no one right way and no one wrong way to do all of this. And then again, too, you can see how some of the Connect Care user groups come together and intersect. And I'm not going to, belabor that particular slide. Next, Eric. And the next steps, we're sorting ourselves out. And then the next step will be communication. And I do want to thank everybody. There are names that are coming forward. But I think if there's some questions, I just want to leave enough time for questions. And I think my voice is starting to go. I had a bad cold at Christmas time, and I seem to be suffering I'm not sick, but I'm suffering with the dry air and the constant yak, yak, yak. So anyway, if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Any questions for Deb at the moment? Not hearing any. Of course, you can reach out to us at playbook@ahs.ca, or to Deb directly if you have any burning concerns or questions. But otherwise, if there's no questions, I think we'll move on. So some of the next pieces of the playbook next steps are around Chapter 2 reporting. So that's going to be introduced online and through the Insight platform the beginning of February. We'll have virtual office hours the following week to further discuss what Chapter 2 looks like in terms of reporting. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Bye.
Sorry, our mics cut out there. We weren't sure if there's any questions there. I think hearing none. Okay. Thanks, everybody.